There we go. So my name is Melissa Ruth, part of the Logan Simpson consultant team working with DOLA on these webinars. We will be recording this session for those of us or those folks who were unable to join us today, or if for some reason your internet cuts out or you drop off the call. We will be posting both the recording and the presentation to the Engage DOLA website later this week. A couple quick housekeeping things. We do have the chat open. So if you would like to ask questions throughout the presentation, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We will do our best to answer them as we go through. We will also read them out for the recording in case folks later on have the same question. If you do want to ask questions anonymously, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We will read those out too, but we won't mention names. And I think you can submit those anonymously as well. I think that's everything. Jen, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Welcome, everybody. I'm Jen Gardner with Logan Simpson, and like Melissa said, part of the consultant team that was hired to help manage and facilitate this series of webinars for Proposition 123. We also have on the phone Sarah McLean from Western Spaces, part of the consultant team, who will be tag teaming this presentation with me today. Additionally, we have Robin DeFalco and Andy Hill from DOLA, Connor from the Department of Housing, Terry Barnard from CHAPA, and then we have joining us today Stefan Wynn from Paonia and Tyler Purvis from Brush. When we get a little bit later into the presentation, our representatives from Paonia and Brush may share a couple of words on how they were able to navigate the commitment process. So without further ado, we'll get into our presentation. So today we're going to do an overview and description of the dedicated funding that's available with Proposition 123. Then we'll go over developing your baseline and filing your commitment, compliance and fast tracking, and any additional resources and technical assistance opportunities that are coming up. So we thought it would be important to kind of highlight the key players in this Proposition 123, and really the primary key player is you, the local governments. We also have DOLA, the Department of Local Affairs, and under the DOLA umbrella is the Division of Housing and Division of Local Government. We have OEDIT, the Office of Economic Development and International Trade, and CHAFA, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority. So as you see us using these acronyms throughout the process, you'll know which department and division we're talking about. So moving into our overview, as many of you know, Proposition 123 was approved by the Colorado voters in 2022. It establishes the State Affordable Housing Fund, which is a fund that takes revenue from our federal taxable income of 0.1%. And what that does, that funding source offers an opportunity to provide access to a dedicated and sustainable source of funding for affordable housing projects and initiatives that we're going to go over here in a little bit. This funding source is not only available just to the local governments, such as municipalities, counties, and tribal governments. It's also available to nonprofits and for-profit developers and housing authorities, other nonprofit agencies, and other third-party agencies. So you'll see as we get into the programs, it'll become a little bit more clear kind of who might be able to access these funds, but it's not just the local government, it's other entities in the community that can access the funds through this commitment filing. It does require the community or the local government to file a commitment, which we'll go over a little bit more in detail later. So we have, I believe, about 47 communities that have filed successful commitments across the state. Everything from your large municipalities such as Denver and Colorado Springs to your smaller municipalities such as Fruita, Estes Park, Golden, rural municipalities such as yourselves. We've got Flagler, Pritchett, Rangeley, Parachute, Craig, Rocky Ford, Paonia, Leadville, Silt, Glenwood Springs, Monte Vista, Montrose, Naturita, and Brush. We also have several unincorporated counties that have filed commitments successfully and a few rural resort communities. So how the funding breaks down, we have our fiscal year 2022 to 23 numbers are in already because the fiscal year ended at the end of June. So the program actually kicked off in earnest January 1st of 23. So the first fiscal year is really only a partial year. The funding that has come in for the first fiscal year is $160 million. And for the second fiscal year is estimated at about $318 million. That funding gets broken down into two categories or buckets. OEDIT and CHAFA receive 60% of those funds to support affordable housing financing. And the 40% of those funds goes to the Division of Housing for Affordable Housing Support Fund. So you can see kind of how those numbers divide up there in those boxes. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. So again, looking at that Colorado income tax revenue at the top of the 0.1% and how that divides into those 60 and 40% categories. The CHAFA and OEDIT side, the 60% funding supports a land banking program, an equity program, and a concessionary debt program. The 40% funding for DOLA supports an affordable home ownership program, a homelessness program, and a local planning capacity development program. So the way we like to think about this is kind of, if you could imagine it like a tree, you've got your community support as the root. So community supporting this commitment to additional housing. I'd like to say affordable, but it's a little bit greater than that. The trunk of the tree is local government commitment. So when you file that commitment, that's that conduit for the community to access these different programs available by OEDIT, CHAFA, and DOLA, which are represented by the branches of the tree. And then once those programs have been accessed, you know, the benefit comes back down into the tree and ultimately supports the roots. So I'd like to just go over a little bit into a little bit more detail on the DOLA programs, that 40% of the funding source that goes into these three different programs. So that 40% bucket actually gets divided up even further. 50% of that funding source goes to an affordable home ownership program, which is supports down payment assistance programs and grants and loans for home ownership, as well as grants for mobile homeowners to assist with purchase of their park. The second program there, programs servicing persons experiencing homelessness, 45% of that kind of DOLA bucket or Division of Housing bucket would serve the homelessness programs, funding people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And that program includes rental assistance, housing vouchers, and eviction defense assistance, including legal, financial, and case management. It also includes some grants for development and preservation of supportive housing and other homelessness-related activities. The last piece of the Division of Housing funding is a local planning capacity grant program, which can provide, to my notes here, which can provide assistance for developing code updates or land use code updates for fast track approval, which we'll hear a little bit more about that process here shortly. Providing assistance to help communities with streamlining development processes, hiring additional staff or contract assistance to review affordable housing applications. And also, once your first commitment is filed, for future commitments, you can use that funding source, that 5% local planning capacity grant, to help support future commitments. So now I'm going to pass it over to Terry for a minute to go through the CHAFA edit programs and how they're broken down.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here. As Jen alluded to, the 60% of the Prop 123 funding goes to the Affordable Housing Financing Fund, which goes to OEDIT, and CHAFA is contracting to administer the funding. It's split into 3 buckets. Basically, there are percentages, guideline percentages of how much goes into each of these. 15 to 30 to 25% can go in for land banking, and so these would be funds that are grants to local governments and forgivable loans to nonprofits, basically to acquire and preserve land for future affordable housing development. We actually have rolled this one out already and received a robust number of LOIs here a couple of weeks ago, and so going through that process. The second bucket is equity, and this is going to comprise the largest of the financing fund piece, which is basically from 40 to 70% of the money. This will be an equity investment into low and middle income multifamily rental development. This is not actually going to be rolling out until later in the year. We're working on that program design right now. The third bucket is concessionary debt, which is really the next one we're looking at. So this is 15 to 35% of the funding would come from this. Concessionary debt is actually further broken out into 4 pieces. One is for tax credit gap financing. One is for tax credit pre-development financing. Another is debt financing for low income, middle income, and preservation deals. And the fourth is a modular component that's funding modular manufacturers. And so for purposes of the way we're thinking about this, the modular piece is being combined with another program that CHAFA is administering for OEDIT. And so for purposes of this presentation, we're really looking at those 3. And the goal, some of the priorities, I should say that the priorities in all of these funding are to achieve high density housing, mixed income housing, and projects that are consistent with the goal of environmental sustainability. So next slide, please. So this shows a little bit of the income guidelines or income timelines from 60% on up. Under the OEDIT and CHAFA programs, the land banking is available to rental projects of 60% AMI, which you can see on that first square, or home ownership projects that are 100% AMI or less. Concessionary debt, all the programs in concessionary debt except for the modular have to average, the restricted units have to average 60% of the area median income, and that includes tax credit gap, tax credit pre-dev, as well as the middle income and low income debt. And the equity program is basically targeted at 90% of an average. All units in a project have to average 90% of AMI or less. And these are specific to these programs and not necessarily related to the baseline. There is a rural resort petition process, which can be utilized for alternative AMI financings. For instance, using the concessionary debt program for a middle income deal, averaging 60% of AMI is not going to happen because they tend to be 80 to 120%. So in a rural resort area, they can petition the Division of Housing for a higher AMI average to hit that would allow those funds to be used in that case then as well. I believe that is all for me, so I will hand it back.
Great, thanks, Terry. I'll just highlight the 2 Division of Housing programs. It's actually the Affordable Home Ownership Program, 2 different components of it. The grants and loans for mobile home parks is targeted at 100% AMI, and the down payment assistance is targeted at 120% AMI. So I think what's important to keep in mind is that these programs do cross a a larger spectrum of AMI rather than just targeting your lower AMI. So it brings forward some programs that can help with kind of what we call the missing middle housing, so to speak. All right, I'm gonna pause now for questions and see if there's any questions in the chat or the Q&A. I've seen a few kind of comments and responses coming through in the chat. Melissa, I don't know if you want to read those off.
Yes, we had one question, if we will be posting the PowerPoints afterwards, and yes, we will be posting both the PowerPoint and the recording on the engagedola.org/prop-123. That's the first link that's in the chat. We'll be dropping links throughout the presentation in the chat, and then for those watching the recording later, all of those links will also be included in the presentation, so you'll be able to see those later. There's also a question from Jonathan on asking how is Glenwood Springs considered rural versus rural resort? And we actually had this conversation earlier today. So the classification rural versus rural resort is based off of county. So rural resorts, if you're designated as a rural resort county, then all the municipalities within that county are also classified as rural resort. And since Glenwood Springs is in Garfield County, Garfield is classified as rural, not as rural resort. But there is a petition process, as Terry mentioned, to be reclassified as a rural resort. And that link is in the chat. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. Andrew, go ahead. Do you have a question?
I don't. Just a point of clarification. There are two kind of separate petition processes. So to answer the question about whether or not a community should across the board be reclassified from rural to resort or from urban to rural, that petition process exists currently through DOLA's Division of Housing. You can contact DOLA to make that blanket kind of petition for reclassification. And then, as Terry mentioned, there is the project-specific petition process, which is something new that will also be available through DOLA's Division of Housing, likely through the same process. But they are kind of two separate petition processes. Separate but related, how about that?
That's a great clarification. Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone have any other, or does that answer the question on Glenwood Springs for you, Jonathan, or did you have additional question? I see you're unmuted, but I can't hear you.
Me now? Okay, yeah, so that was, I appreciate the answer to that. I look forward to hearing further more on the reclassification process and if we even want to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Great. Got a couple questions in the Q&A. One that asks, is there a size of mobile home park that will be eligible, and what other mobile home park related standards are there to access funds? I believe that's related to the Affordable Home Ownership Program. Someone from DOLA, do you want to answer that question on mobile home parks?
So currently, DOLA's Division of Housing accepts gap funding applications from resident-owned communities, from housing authorities, nonprofits, seeking to acquire mobile home parks and ensure long-term or permanent affordability. At the moment, there is no size limit or minimum that is published. DOH has certain per home funding guideline maximums published. That is $50,000 in rural and rural resort community per unit or per home. Those are our current published guidelines. We are seeking this kind of feedback, looking forward to creating new programs funded specifically by Prop 123 for 2024 and beyond. So would love to hear feedback from those interested in this particular issue, what's needed in your community, as well as other issues. In addition to these kind of intro and intro focused webinars, we will be back out in the very near future from DOLA's Division of Housing's perspective on the affordable home ownership programs, seeking feedback as to how we should build out new programs, new funding amounts and guidelines. So would love to get this type of feedback now and or in the future when we go out to look for more specifics.
Thanks, Andrew. David, I see your hands up. Go ahead and was there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I appreciate it. That was actually my question, Andrew. I'm Dave Kimmett with the town of Lyons. And so you mentioned gap funding. You know, we have a 100% gap to fund. So certainly if you could contemplate other opportunities for rural communities such as Lyons that definitely have a hard time meeting the needs of our increasingly expensive town, and with the mobile home park residents, permanent homes in jeopardy in places like ours. I'm all ears and be happy to chat with you further about this.
Thank you. I could appreciate that, and we are absolutely anticipating getting more into the weeds, kind of in a thoughtful and systematic way as we roll out programs for next year that will have different guidelines, you know, engineered to meet the needs of each and every one of our well, that may be a practical impossibility, but I think you understand what I'm saying. You know, we need guidelines engineered to fit the entire state with each unique region's needs in mind.
Right. Thank you.
Great. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A. One that asks, where can we find the list of county classifications? Is that, Robin, where is that list? Is that publicly available or is it in statute? Can you remind me?
Yes, and I just posted it in the chat. I believe it was the last thing posted at 1:23 p.m. It says county and municipality reclassification request form. Sorry, that's the form. And if you go to it earlier, I'll drop it in again, but it does, it was from the Colorado Strategic Housing Working Group in 2021, and there is a report, and that list is in the report. And I just dropped it in the chat again to everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. One more question here in the Q&A. As we work through the funding, is there going to be any funds set aside based on community size? So X% for municipalities, Y for rural, etc.
I could attempt to answer that. I think it's accurate to say that the statute, the Prop 123 statute, does not specifically call for that, as some other legislation has designated a certain percent of funds going towards rural, urban, or rural resort. But in this case, I think most of the agencies involved, and including CHAFA, have indicated an intent to distribute the funds to diverse grant recipients across the state. It has been stated that we don't intend for this to just all go to the Front Range or the urban areas. We know there's great need in many rural communities, and the needs are different. So I think it's fair to say that is an intent, even if it's not formally in statute. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I think you said that well, Robin, from Division of Housing's affordable home ownership and homelessness response perspective.
Ditto for Jaffa.
Great. Are there any more questions before we move into the actual commitment filing section? Oh, one more. If a rural resort community wants to petition, do we need to fill that out at the time of commitment? Robin's shaking her head no.
The answer would be no, those are separate processes. So the commitment filing, which we're getting to in the next section, is independent of all of the other things. And again, there is on the slide deck a little bit later in the presentation, a placeholder where we can talk a little bit more about where that plays in, but it is specifically on the funding programs, not the commitment filing.
Great, that is everything in the chat and Q&A, so I think we'll move forward into the commitment filing and establishing your baseline.
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks everyone for your great questions. So now we have sort of an understanding of what opportunities become available if you choose to opt in. So let's talk a little bit about what steps are involved in that process. First of all is establishing your baseline. And before we talk through this, I want to give the definition of affordable, which is defined by statute and will be consistent throughout the baseline and commitment estimations. Affordable is defined as no more than 30% of monthly household income toward housing payment. So this will be consistent, and this is by statute, so there is no changing this. So the first step is to establish what median income you're going to use. And there are really three options for this. It's the area median income, the median family income, or the state median income. And the DOLA has developed a couple tools to look at how choosing one or the other moves your baseline up or down. And we will cover those, Connor will cover those next. The next is to look at your household income distribution once you know what your median income is, to see where households fall on that scale. And there are only two sources for this. And again, that is also by statute. And you can choose to use HUD CHAS data or American Community Survey data. So once you've chosen your median income and what source you're going to use for your household income distribution, you can then look at how many households are affordable in your community, which is, again, by definition, no more than 30% of monthly household income toward payment. And for ownership, those are households with a limit of 100% AMI. And for rental, those are households with a limit of 60% AMI. So all owner and households falling below those incomes will fall into your baseline. That will be your baseline. From that, the step 5 is to choose if you're going to file your commitment, and that will be to increase by 9% in 3 years, increase that baseline. So what is your commitment? What I just said a minute ago is to increase your affordable housing by 3% annually or 9% over 3 years. And that's going to include new housing, and that's when it's permitted, not when it has a certificate of occupancy. And then it's going to include existing housing that could be converted or is converted from market rate to affordable with some mechanism to preserve affordability, such as a deed restriction or a land use restrictive agreement. So step 1 is to do your baseline calculation. As I mentioned, there are a couple tools available to help you with this. 2 is to file your commitment. And then you can begin counting units towards your goal. And you can start counting as soon as that commitment is accepted. So if you file before November 1st and you have some permits that are coming in, that would fall in the affordable category, you can start counting those before November 1st. So as I just mentioned, you can file early and you can start counting once your filing is accepted. So you can choose to do a 3-year commitment, which would be filing by this November 1st. Or if for some reason that does not work for you, you could opt to do a 2-year commitment or a 1-year commitment. And after that 3-year period from now until 2026, if you want to opt into the next round of funding, you will start over and establish a new baseline at that point. With that, I'm going to open it up for a few questions before we switch to Connor to walk you through some of the tools available.
Thanks, Sarah. We do have one question in the Q&A that asks, in an affordable home ownership model, what constitutes 30%? PITI only or PITI plus basic utilities?
I would respond with, I'm not sure what PITI is. Can you clarify?
The questions from K. John Wood. Are you able to clarify what you mean by PITI?
Well, interest, taxes, insurance.
Yeah. Am I unmuted? Yeah, this is John Wood. I'm a city councilor in Uray. So yeah, my question was, because we're going through a project right now and we're kind of trying to dial in on this number of 30% and what exactly is contained within that. And so the question is, in an ownership model, is it principal, interest, taxes, and insurance that are part of that 30%? Or are utilities expected to be included? Because in the rental model, it's my understanding that utilities are expected to be included in the rental rate when you're talking about a rental apartment versus an ownership model. Did everyone get that?
I did hear that, and I'd like to, if Connor is here, maybe lean on him for a second for that. Is he on?
Yeah, so utilities are prohibited
Okay.
from inclusion in the affordability calculation.
Okay,
Whether
so
it's
but
the baseline
taxes and
or-
insurance would be included or not?
They can be included.
They can be. Okay, so it is just the PITI when you're talking about affordability. Okay, great.
Right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We had one more question come in through the Q&A, and Connor, I think this one will also be for you. For baseline calculations on affordable housing, there are significant discrepancies between the tools provided and the actuals for the Southern Ute Indian tribe. What would DOLA's recommendation be for us when looking to establish a baseline?
Well, the recommendation that I would have is in the research that we've done on the Ute tribe, we invested several weeks into expanding our resources so that they would work for the tribes, which were a late addition. I think it would be pretty tough to get a baseline lower than what is allowable and possible with the current tool configuration. So I would kind of have that as a starting point, because we really all have to go back to the statutory requirements and definitions, and localities are welcome to compile their own figures so long as they otherwise comply with statute. But that said, we haven't seen a single filing yet with a locality's self-provided and calculated figures. So if any localities, including a tribe, think that the existing resources still do not work, then I'll put my email in the chat so that we can have a more focused discussion on what's possible.
That'd be great. I'll snag your email out of chat. Appreciate the response.
Wonderful. We had one more question come in through the chat that asks, what is the penalty for not achieving the commitment? We are going to talk about that in just a second, but there is no penalty or clawbacks, but with an asterisk, we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a few minutes. Alrighty, I think we'll move on to the commitment filing and hand it over to Connor.
Thanks, Melissa. So as localities are considering a commitment filing, again, the first step is determining the baseline amount of affordable housing. And the starting place that we really recommend, even for that, is the first resource that we put together for localities to help them consider their baselines. And that's our baseline reference data table, which is really just a spreadsheet with different combinations of policy options that localities may go with. A lot of the feedback that we received when we first published this in the winter of this year was that this tool has some positive aspects. If you find a figure that looks realistic and achievable to your locality, and it's on this spreadsheet, then that's really about as simple as this process can get. But the negative trade-offs that we saw is that these figures came from about 2019. So a lot of the data, it wasn't adjusted for inflation. A lot has changed since then. It also doesn't allow you to kind of fine tune the particular economic situation of your locality as you're looking at that baseline. So this is why we have another option, our baseline assistance tool. And this is what we really suggest for folks that have a higher population in their locality, or that have especially high costs, or if they find that their baseline figure in that original spreadsheet doesn't seem especially realistic. The baseline assistance tool allows for a lot of flexibility to really kind of counterbalance those negative trade-offs with that spreadsheet. You're able to adjust for inflation so that you're modeling your current housing market. You're able to fine-tune your for-sale housing and the amount that is affordable. That's where there's some more flexibility in statute. So this is a great option for folks, and what we've found is when people are using the baseline assistance tool, it can take maybe a few hours, maybe a few days to put something together, which is a great option compared to putting together the information by yourself. If you were to do that, depending on your Excel skills, it could take anywhere from several days to several weeks if you were to use the Census Bureau data and to run everything yourself by hand. But once you have all of your baseline information together, you might find that the number that's produced isn't something that is achievable for your locality. This is something that we do have some flexibility in the statute. So instead of using the area median income of your own county, you can use an alternative income limit. So an AMI from a neighboring county or the state household median income. This can have the effect of making your baseline lower, but in order to use this policy flexibility, we expect a discussion on how this alternative income limit better reflects your local housing and workforce needs. That is a requirement in statute. So there is additional justification in that commitment if you use these alternative income limits after you've determined that baseline amount. And it looks like we have a question from Pamela here. So Pamela wrote, can you explain if we select the baseline from a neighboring county, will our AMI calculations for new affordable units have to be based on that county's AMI? This answer is a slightly complicated one. So the new affordable units, whether you count them will differ based on what kind of angle you're approaching it from. On the compliance side, the income limit that you choose up front, like your neighboring county's AMI, if you choose that income limit, that's the bar that you're going to be held against when you're counting those achievements over the next few years. But if you're looking at this from the funding and the program side, maybe you're getting a CHAFA loan, a Division of Housing, or a Division of Local Government grant, those AMIs would all depend on the programs themselves and any other kind of policies and procedures that those individual programs have in place. But I think that's all of the questions so far. Good. So we have an example to walk through here on filing your commitment. So once you establish that baseline, we have an online form system to file that commitment. And what we've heard from folks is that this can be the quickest part. It takes a few hours, a few days to really land on that baseline. It can take less than an hour to file that commitment. And we have an example today from one of our filers, which is already submitted to us. The town of Paonia is a great example, and I think they are here today to field some questions and discussion right after this section. So just to kind of walk through the filing here, as you are presented with a form, first you just fill out some basic administrative information, including that baseline amount of affordable housing. And something good to double check here is that the information you put in is that baseline number, not the smaller annual goal or the 3-year goal. And on the next part is where we start to fill in some information on the baseline itself. When you fill out your baseline county, your household size, this is where you start to provide just a little bit of information so that us at the state can start to walk through what is the baseline that you got to and how did you get to where you found at the end of the day. And the lengthiest part that we have is the discussion on the methods used to determine that baseline. And I think that Paonia struck an excellent balance here. Some of the discussions that we see are fairly short, some are quite extensive, but Paonia is right in the middle, and we really like this layout of a paragraph or so, a few bullets on what is the resource that you used, what are the variables and the options that you chose to model your own housing, and how does that all connect with that baseline that you put together, just so that it helps us reproduce that baseline and gives us something good to look back at when we're considering those achievements in a few years. And after that, we have some more optional narratives. So the CHAFA team was describing the statutory priorities earlier, which are required for the CHAFA programs, but are also discussed in the commitment part of the statute. So no localities are required to advance any priorities such as sustainability or density in order to file a commitment or have a commitment accepted, but statute does mention this, so we do have an optional spot for folks to fill this in here. You can see that Paonia got that good middle balance again, a few sentences. And this is a place where we see many localities have success in citing or copying from existing comprehensive planning documents. And we have another optional section after this, which will be covered in extra depth later, which is the collaboration between localities in achieving those increases in affordable housing. Now, this is not something that needs to be filled in or figured out at all at the time of commitment, but we at the state do want to keep tabs on what localities are thinking about in terms of working together to take credit for those increases. So if you already have some thoughts, they are appreciated here so that we can start facilitating those discussions later this year and next. And the last spot that we have is a really straightforward kind of verification of what's the information that was put in, so that we can all have that last check on that baseline and that all of the figures are being put together as we expect and that it's being agreed to, so that we've again got those ducks in a row and we're considering compliance in the out years here. And again, there's some really strong things about this filing that we want to reiterate for folks. The correct administrative information about that baseline amount in the name of the town or city, as well as that discussion on the baseline and how it was determined. We're not expecting anything especially lengthy, but any information that you do have that helps us go through that tracing process is very much appreciated and can help speed up that turnaround time with the commitment review as well. Because how the process works for us is we do a completeness review first, make sure that all that administrative information is put in there, then we do that compliance review so that we can connect the dots that everything is still complying with statute. And that is the end of our example here, and I don't see any questions in the chat.
We have a
Is there
few in the
any-
Q&A. We have one that asks, so to establish our baseline, we can use either the ACS baseline or the CHAS baseline from the Google Doc you sent. Yes, you can choose which one you want to use, whichever one is most accurate for your community. Correct? Yes.
Exactly.
Wonderful. And then another question from K. John Wood. If a county, a town, and a city want to partner in their commitment, which AMR should govern? Can individual entities achieve a joint goal but split the baseline specific to their entity?
I'm not sure I followed that, but I'll give an answer and let me know what I can follow up on. In terms of the commitment in the baseline, each baseline commitment is your locality zone. So if you're working with a county, that county would have to file its own commitment, and so would you. But at the end of the day, so long as you enter into a written agreement with one or more other localities, you can take that joint credit as you see fit. And we're going to be having some more discussions and guidance on that later this year. And some more discussion on that towards the end of this presentation.
I would also just add that we have heard that several parts of the state, there are these regional partnerships where we've got a county working with their respective municipalities on exactly this type of partnership on the commitment. Now, as Connor just stated, each jurisdiction needs to file separately, but there's this idea that between them, they recognize all of their numbers ultimately are the need for their region, for the countywide housing need, and that as they work towards building housing in that county and in each municipality, they're going to work together to all achieve their goals by the end of the time. And some of that may come in the form of deciding we're both investing in this project and we're both going to share or split up, divvy up the total units created from a project. So if you're looking for other examples of that, our team might be able to help through our technical assistance process.
Great, thank you. That explains what I was after. Thank you.
Wonderful. We had one more question come in, excuse me, through the chat that asks, from Sally Rush, that asks, what source best reflects the mortgage rate entry in the baseline?
Sally, I'm not sure that you follow that. Do you mean when you're determining that baseline, how should you consider the mortgage interest rate?
Connor, I don't understand that question. Ask it again, please.
Would you please rephrase your question from the chat?
Yes, in the baseline, when you're doing the analysis tool and you come to the mortgage rate, I've been looking at different sources, but what source would be acceptable for this application? And I did look at the one that you gave me one back last week, but maybe I just didn't understand it. So I'm going to ask it again.
Okay. I like this question. So I think that when you're considering the mortgage interest rate, you could use any source that you think is appropriate and accurate. So for example, we see most localities trying to model their current housing market by selecting an income limit from 2022. So if you're going through that type of exercise, any kind of information source on that mortgage rate for 2022 or today, I think would be a good way to go. And it could be 7% or roughly around there. That's what we're seeing with most localities.
Okay, and I'm still not clear on what specific backup information we need for that. Because I did have Freddie Mac, and if you're saying 7%, how can I justify that?
You can either, you could provide a link to the Freddie Mac website. You could put in parentheses that it's from Freddie Mac. The documentation that we're looking for isn't really exhaustive, and it really differs based on each locality. What's most important is that the baseline complies with statute. We're not going to be breaking into the pocket calculator and reading glasses for the citations.
All right, that works. Thank you.
Thanks, Connor. Oh, wow. We have one more question that came in through the Q&A from Monique Garrett that asks, is there a standard square footage for homes to justify the home sales price determined to be affordable by the baseline analysis? For example, would the affordable sales price apply to a 1,000 square foot home or to a 2,500 square foot home?
So as far as square footage goes, that's not something that's collected by the U.S. Census Bureau in their American Community Survey, which is one of those statutorily required data sources. So I imagine the person asking this question is trying to kind of fine-tune their baseline amount of affordable housing, and especially that baseline amount of affordable for-sale housing. The way that we would suggest doing that is by changing the sale availability rate in the baseline assistance tool, which is set to 20% by default, because that is the portion of units that were turning over statewide around 2019 that it made sense to include in the baseline. But we know that things have changed since then, and we see many localities lowering that 10%, 5%, even less. So that's what we would suggest before looking at square footage.
Great. Are there any other questions at this point before we move to the next section? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and go on to the next section and I'll hand it back over to Sarah.
Thank you for that, Melissa. So I believe that Stefan with the town of Paonia is joining us today and is going to talk a little bit about their firsthand experience with establishing their baseline and filing their commitment.
Yeah, I can. So, you know, using that baseline tool is what we utilize to come up with, you know, where our baseline was at. It's really simple to use, and we were advised by our regional DOLA rep that you can do all sorts of different calculations. You can come up with it on your own, but the best way to do, you know, approach this is to use the tool that's available. And, you know, I replied to Sally directly in the chat. So, you know, the question about the, you know, where did I come up, or where, you know, how do you come up with that average mortgage rate? I had a unique situation. I'm currently relocating or you know, to Colorado and purchasing a home from Florida. And so I'm working with a mortgage broker that had success with like HUD programs. And she was able to give me data on our region that helped me come up with that average rate. So that's kind of where I pulled that from. And, you know, also with knowing that the Fed had raised that interest rate, we knew that, hey, rates were also going to be going up after we had locked in ours. So, but again, I think the best advice that I can give anyone that's going to use that baseline tool, and Connor was really, really helpful because I was using the wrong numbers. I was using my annual, you know, that annual 3% over the baseline. And he said, no, I think you're using the wrong numbers. When I went back to what the baseline tool said, I was like, yep, you're absolutely right. It should be that 281 number, not 8. So just make sure that whatever is, calculated on that baseline tool, plug that into your application.
Well, thank you for that. Do we have anyone that wants to ask any questions of the town of Paonia's filing or the process that they went through? I'll just ask while we have you here, Stefan. Did it take you a long time to sort of go through the process start to finish, or how was it for you in general?
It was a couple of hours, but it was a couple of hours because I went to like the Bureau of Labor Statistics and I tried to look at what inflation was for housing, that with that CPI, their calculators online. So, I was able to do that to come up with, where that 3.8% was for inflation between this year and last year. So it did take me a little bit longer, but, I also wanted to make sure that the information I was getting was accurate.
I see that David has his hand up. Do you want to go ahead, David?
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question for you, Stefan. So literally 2 hours? That's it?
That was it. and so it's really not that hard. It did take a couple of days back and forth with Connor because, after that initial review of our application, I had plugged in the wrong numbers from that baseline tool. And working with Connor, I was able to find out that, oops, I was putting in the 3% over. And David, I don't know where you're from, but we're a really small rural community on the western slope that has actually been working to tackle affordable housing. So it's been like at the forefront of everybody's, even my board of trustees' minds over the last few months.
No, so I'm from the town of Lyons, which is about the same size as the town of Paonia and different part of the state, but we, or at least I, often use Paonia as an example. So great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you for that, David. And I see we did have a question from Sally with Clear Creek County. She said, how long did it take you to get your acceptance from DOLA? So once you went ahead and filed it, how long was the acceptance process?
Not very long at all. Of course, things kept getting kicked back, and that was because I was plugging the wrong numbers in. But once I plugged in that the correct baseline number, and not like that percentage over the baseline, it was really quick to get an answer back. I'll say DOLA was very, very responsive to everything that we put in.
Thank you for that, Stefan. And thank you, Connor, for being very responsive. Do we have any other questions coming in before we move on? We'd like to talk to Tyler Purvis from Brush, who will also share his experience.
We don't have any more questions in the Q&A or in the chat.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and invite Tyler to give us a little description of what their process was like.
Very good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Tyler Purvis again with the city of Brush up here in Northeast Colorado. Our population, just for some context, is about 5,500. So if I remember the thresholds correctly, we're not in the exact same realm as I think everybody on this call is, but we're just above it. So kind of dwarfs in that one, but I don't think that's really a factor in the whole scheme of things. I submitted our application back on the 15th. The night before the 14th, our council went ahead and gave us the nod to move forward and opt in. So I had attended one of these the week before to get a good understanding of that. And so went ahead and got that squared away. My original intention was to go through and determine our own baseline. But as I got in there and began to play around with some of the numbers, I had noticed that the variables weren't changing our baseline very much. And not that one or two houses is insignificant, especially in a small community, because they each are. But relatively speaking, it wasn't making a huge impact in comparison to what our overall need was going to be for the 3-year change. So it ended up being 66 for us was the increase that we needed to have. So 22 per year. And so as I was manipulating that, I might have got up to 67 or 68 or 65. So again, it wasn't significant. So I went ahead and just bailed on trying to establish our own and just ran with the numbers that were already given because they were, it was quicker, to be quite honest with you. And so submitted that. It was pretty straightforward. Just like Stefan, I also had submitted incompatible information. So back on the 17th, I got an email back saying, hey, could you go back in and get that squared away? So I did that. I think there might have been some technical issues after that, but we're ultimately squared away and opted in now.
Thank you, Tyler. Melissa, I think we have a couple questions in the chat.
We do. We had a comment from Connor that I think is a great anecdote for kind of this whole process. He said, we are building this plane while we're flying it, so we appreciate the back and forth from Paonia and all the other localities. We're trying to keep track of pain points so that we can streamline the process next year and next cycle. So I just thought that was a really great anecdote. We are building this plane as we are flying it. We're working on things, trying to update things, and DOLA is working really hard to address concerns and pitch points as we move through the process. And then we do have one question from Michael Yearman asking, can you please cover reporting the baseline process moving forward? How will this be done, and will it be yearly or at the end of the 3-year period? I think we'll get to that in just a second. Are there any other questions for Tyler on the process from the City of Brush?
Hi, this is DJ from the City of Monte Vista.
Yeah,
I have a quick one. So we did opt in already. We did that part, and we were doing this, and I seen the list of cities and what their baseline was projected to be in the data from 2019, which I didn't see that before. I kind of wish I had, because it was way lower than the baseline I developed. Can I change my baseline down to that amount, or is my commitment now solid and I have to do because it was the difference of about 15 homes, which in a community of 4,000 is a significant percentage. So is there a way to adjust that down to what was on that list? Because I guess I missed where that was before I did my commitment using the baseline tool that DOLA provided.
So we have, perhaps surprisingly, not gotten that question yet. I'm tempted to say that it's likely okay so long as it's refiled before everything closes in November. So I'll circle back with our leadership team to confirm that and get back to you, DJ.
Thank you.
Maybe just to highlight that one thing we've been hearing is the baseline assistance tool can be really helpful. But the other thing is, especially for smaller communities, you may find that that table, which we originally posted, we're calling that the local government baseline table, data reference table, that has numbers and they're set for you. And if you're comfortable with those numbers, they work fine. And you can just say, I accept this and it complies with statute, right? If the numbers do not feel like they align, you can use that baseline assistance tool to adjust those numbers. But starting with the table is a good place to start. And it could be a 15-minute process to file if those numbers work for you. Connor, anything you'd like to say in case I said that wrong?
Spot on.
Well, I think you said it well, Robin. Do we have any other questions for Tyler while we have him here with us? Well, thank you, Tyler. We really do appreciate you being here and sharing your experience, along with Stefan as well. You know, I think it's really helpful for other communities to hear from those that have been through the process. So we do really appreciate your time.
You bet, my pleasure. And Connor, thank you for your help in getting everything squared away.
Ready for the next slide? Thank you. So just a few filing takeaways. One is it does not take too much time to file. And we heard that from both Tyler and Stefan. And it's been sort of echoed from other communities as well. And what Robin highlighted, especially for smaller communities, is that the baseline reference data table might be as far as you need to go as far as looking at the numbers. It might just work for you. So we'd recommend you take a look at that first before diving into the baseline assistance tool. Next is that most successful localities have a 3-year goal which balances needs, capacity, and reality. So there are some opportunities in the baseline assistance tool to sort of move things around a little bit as you heard from today, to try to see what will fit with you and your jurisdiction. The Department of Housing will only ask you to resubmit your filing if it is incomplete or not compliant with statute. And you did hear there's been some back and forth. Connor's been great at getting back and working with people as well as everyone else at DOLA. So the only downside of not meeting your commitment is you are not eligible for funding in 2027 only. So you will not be asked to pay a bunch of funds back if you do not meet that. Funds for local governments as well as third parties, developers, nonprofits, homeowners, and residents. So choosing to unlock the funds for your jurisdiction will also unlock them for other groups as well. And currently your filing will remain confidential with the exception of your community name. In the future, your baseline and commitment numbers may also be published. Do we have any questions before we move on to, I believe, compliance and thinking about that next step?
We don't have anything in the chat or Q&A.
Okay.
Wait, I just wanted to bring up that Michael's question about how you count the units. Is now a good time to touch on that, or is that coming up next?
You're welcome if you want to touch on that, Robin. We do touch on it a little bit coming into compliance.
Okay, yeah, let's wait and get to that section then. Thank you.
So compliance and fast track approval, assuming you filed your commitment, you've established your baseline and you're working towards that commitment. So December 31st, 2026 is the deadline to meet the 9% increase. And that's assuming that you file this year, it would be 9%. If you filed next year, it would be 6%, or the following year would be 3%. And what counts towards your commitment is new housing and existing housing that's converted from market rate to affordable. And if you fail to achieve your commitment target, you become ineligible for funds in 2027 only, but you can file a 2-year commitment to be eligible for funding again in 2028. And so this graphic hopefully looks familiar to you. We highlighted it earlier. What we've added to this is the sort of pink dot on the bottom for November 1st, 2026, establishing a new baseline. And also that's when you will think about establishing your fast track approval process, having that in place. And we will talk about what that is in a few slides. I think we can go ahead here, Melissa. Thanks. So we highlighted a little bit about regional partnerships and collaboration, and we wanted to call this out as sort of an opportunity. Each jurisdiction must establish their own baseline and file a commitment separately, but there are opportunities for collaboration and partnerships. They may happen once you're working towards creating new housing, and this can be on development projects. For example, a county-owned lot located within a municipality, you might want to look at counting some portion of those units towards the municipality's commitment and some towards the county's commitment. You could look at joint funding applications, usually one lead fiscal year agent between a municipality and a county or other groups. And counting newly created units, that's House Bill 23-1304, allows 2 localities to decide how to divvy up the units, as long as each unit is only counted once. Intergovernmental agreements or memorandums of understanding are encouraged in all of these instances. We wanted to highlight just a few reasons for why you might think about participating and filing a commitment and unlocking the funds. It allows a jurisdiction to partner on funding on a project. And if you don't opt in, you'd be ineligible as a partner. Opting in also opens up opportunities to everyone else, like nonprofits, developers, etc., who may want to develop affordable housing. And if his jurisdiction fails to achieve their commitment target, there's no penalty or clawback. It's better to miss out on 1 year of funding than to miss out on 3 years of funding by not opting in. Choosing to participate would ensure that all options for affordable housing remain available and could potentially enhance the attraction of partners and funding. So it could potentially bring people to your community if you're looking for that. Can agree in writing to share units, which we talked about on the previous slide, among cooperating local governments, preferably through a written agreement, such as an IGA or an MOU. And with this agreement, you can outline a procedure for distributing the units, and it's up to you how you do that. The House bill defined that, but it's important not to count any units twice. So we talked a little earlier about the rural resort community. Glenwood had some questions on this, and Andrew did a really good job of clarifying. There's 2 components to this, right? So one is, are you classified as a rural resort community? And that's any county or municipality, whether home rule or statutory, or a local housing authority within the county classified as rural resort by a division in accordance with section 29-4-1107. And I do have a list of those that are classified as rural resort, but you can also look it up. And I believe Robin posted that in the chat earlier. So if you are classified as rural resort community, you can choose to petition to use a different AMI for the CHFA OEDIT programs. This is not a different AMI to establish your baseline. It's a different AMI for the CHFA OEDIT programs only. If you would like to become a rural resort community and you're not, there's a link at the bottom of this slide that you can request a reclassification. Guidance is also currently being developed on this process right now. As Melissa highlighted, as Connor mentioned, we're sort of building this plane as it's flying. So there is guidance being developed, and we do welcome any feedback that you have regarding this. So what is the fast track approval process, right? I mentioned you don't have to do it right now, but at the end of the 3 years, you need to have this in place if you want to file for the next round of funding. So you need to establish a procedure to finalize a decision on a complete application, such as a special permit, variance, or other development permit, within 90 calendar days, provided that 50% or more of the units constitute affordable housing, and that's excluding subdivisions. There is an option to extend for an additional 90 calendar days at the request of the developer, or for a review period required by another local government or agency where approval is required. It could also grant extensions for 30 days from response for additional information or revisions. And as I mentioned, it is not required for the first iteration, but it must be in place for if you file a commitment that is due November 1st, 2026. So just some takeaways from compliance and the fast track. You need to demonstrate 3% increase annually or 9% over 3 years. The fast track is not required now. Conversion of units also counts towards a commitment. Loss of existing affordable units does not affect meeting your commitment. New units count toward a commitment at building permit. They do not have to have a certificate of occupancy by the end of 3 years. And you can start counting units as soon as a filing is accepted. And also you can develop regional partnerships to meet your commitment if multiple jurisdictions build housing jointly. And we do encourage a written agreement going into that. We do have a stoplight here, so I'd like to see if we have any questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
We don't have any, but I want to circle back to Michael's question on reporting the baseline moving forward and how this will be done, if it'll be yearly or over 3 years. Michael, did that answer your question, or does anyone from DOLA want to provide any additional information on reporting on your commitment?
One thing I'd like to share is that DOLA will be working on publishing some guidance materials on how to count these units over the 3 years, because you will want to start keeping track as soon as your commitment's been accepted. So new units at permitting, that's pretty straightforward. Existing units converted, that's somewhat straightforward, but there are some questions on that. And then there are questions about like preservation of units, right? So we're working on getting, there's what statute says, and then there's a little gray area and how you can interpret this. So coming soon, some guidance materials so that everybody's working with the same understanding on how to count and track those units over 3 years, which are then reported in 2026. And you have through the end of 2026, all the way till December 31st. So I hope that offers clarification. And I do see a hand up with Dave.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate taking the time for all these questions, and sorry that I have so many. So the second to last bullet, can start counting units produced as soon as the filing is accepted. Has that been mentioned, how long it usually takes to accept the file?
I don't think we have. So we do it roughly weekly. Your mileage can vary based on the completeness and compliance of the filing, as well as our bandwidth. Unfortunately, we're still ramping up our commitment and compliance team here. We've been absorbing this for the past almost a year now. So it might take a little bit longer or a little bit shorter. But we haven't heard from any localities that they got a wrench thrown into their machine by a review taking too long.
Okay, great. Yeah, it just so happens that we have some affordable units going in right now. So possibly we'll make it. Okay, thanks.
We have another question from, maybe from Jonathan.
No, sorry, I was just going back and forth between the Q&A and the chat, and I didn't see that link. Thank you for including that link.
Wonderful. So we did drop the link for the jurisdiction reclassification in the chat again. So for those looking to kind of click through that form, you can, it's right there at the bottom of the chat or top of the chat, depending on how your chat looks.
There's one more thing I thought we should mention. No one's asked this question today, but we've heard it quite a few times about whether or counting units and which ones count. And it's been determined that if a project to build housing gets funded by one of the CHAFA programs, and I want to invite Terry to chime in on this to make sure I'm saying it accurately. If the project is funded by one of the CHAFA Prop 123 programs, then those units can count towards your goal. And so, for example, there's a funding program that would help with preservation of existing affordable housing. And so that could count as well. Terry, did you want to comment on that to make sure I got it accurately?
And I'm sorry, Robin, I didn't quite catch the core of the question itself.
Just about any CHAFA funding that helps build units means that those units can count towards the counting units over the 3 years towards your goal.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I'm sorry, that was my answer. Absolutely, yes, they can count, so.
Great. Any other questions on compliance and fast track? I don't see anything else in the Q&A, but if anyone wants to raise their hand before we get to our last section and kind of wrap up.
One last comment. Sorry so much for me today, but on the fast track, we are also working on guidance on fast track and what that looks like. Again, there's what's in statute, and there are a few different ways that can be interpreted. So we're holding a stakeholder engagement process this fall, starting soon. And if you would like to be part of that process, whether you're a local government representative or a developer, please reach out and let us know. You can put your name in the chat and then I can follow up with you. We recognize that this is going to look different for larger urban municipalities compared to smaller. And we want to make sure that it's clear to everyone how to comply with that and how to interpret the language in the statute. So we're trying to develop some guidance materials that make that clear for everyone. So if you'd like to be involved in that process, go ahead and reach out to me before you leave the webinar today.
Okay, we had one more question come in through the chat from Sally that asks, we have 4 units getting ready for building permits right now. How quickly do we have to get our application in for units count?
So, Sally, I wonder if you know when your planning department director will be signing off on those permits.
John, would you like to answer that?
We're not 100% sure yet. I anticipate it before the filing deadline, probably, but it'll probably be, they've already gone through all the approval process of the city, so they just need to submit for building permits at this point. And so that's kind of where we're sitting.
Thanks. And just, so this is something that'll be discussed more in the fall. But one of the things that we've been thinking about is when are we going to set the kind of red light for that permitting process? One of the bars we've been thinking about is that planning director signing the permit is when the end could be. So maybe for your locality, it'll be a non-issue, but we'll be getting deeper into that in the fall. And in addition to what it looks like from a process perspective, actually submitting that compliance information.
So Connor, this is Sally. So the 4 units building permit, Habitat will be applying for those first week in September. And I foresee that Idaho Springs will have their application in and complete and accepted probably by the middle of September. So those 4 units should count. Is that correct?
So when you said apply, is it apply for?
Apply for the building permit. Yeah, it's going to be apply for the building permit, and then it's going to take a while for the approval. So it's going to take, what, 5 or 6 weeks maybe? So by that time, yeah, Idaho Springs would have already submitted their application to you guys and been accepted. So there shouldn't be a problem with those units, right?
Yeah, I'd imagine so. You can always send us a nudge or have Idaho Springs do so on your behalf if it doesn't seem like things are moving along. If we get a complete and compliant commitment these days, it's rare for it to take longer than 2 weeks from start to finish after we receive it.
Thanks, Connor. We had one more question come in through the chat. That I think is also probably for you. What if you don't sign the building permits? So if there's a separate building department at the county level that does the permitting?
Yeah, I think what I'd lean towards right now is whatever entity has that final say, that the last person that has that last say before that building can begin. That's likely what's most important. But let us know what you have to add and what you all see differently in the fall here.
Great. Any other questions on compliance and fast track?
I have a question. Rick Carugna, Town Administrator for Georgetown. We submitted an LOI for the land bank grant. And the question came up in our council meeting and I just didn't have the answer. And I thought maybe this could be a good opportunity to ask it. If we were to be selected to get the grant to go after this piece of property that we want to do affordable housing on, and I believe it's through CHAFA. Is there any flexibility? Because the board was asking, does it have to be 100% rental apartments, or can there be low income owner that where they can buy the homes too? Could it be a mixed use development, or does it have to be 100% apartments?
Hey, Rick, I think I can answer that. I'm not working directly on the land banking piece, but the measure, the Prop 123 language does allow for 100% of AMI home ownership and 60% AMI rental. So, being in one project, I don't think is going to be basically one parcel would be an issue.
Okay, so we could subdivide it and say part of this will be the apartments, the other part could be townhomes to be purchased, affordable housing townhomes or something.
Yes.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you.
You bet.
Go ahead, Robin.
Question come in as a direct message, and I just thought it was worth sharing with a couple other folks that many of your names are familiar to me, and the other hat that I wear is the IHOP planning grant with DOLA. And one of the strategies that some of you are working on is what we're calling expedited review, very similar to the fast track concept. And so if you are one of our grantees working on that, the answer is that yes, as part of your IHOP planning grant, you can be working on that expedited review strategy in a way that it could align with the fast track requirements. The caveat being that we still don't have real, solid published guidelines on what that looks like and how to comply. So we know some grantees have started working on that, which is wonderful. But it's also okay to hold off a few more months, and hopefully we can provide better guidance towards the end of 2023 that can inform that process. And it can certainly count as one of the strategies for the IHOP goals.
Thanks. I think that's a great question. One more chance to ask any final questions before we move into kind of a recap and all of the links and such. Okay. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks, Melissa. So just to wrap up here, we want to highlight some additional resources and some technical assistance that is available. We hope that we've covered quite a few questions and given you quite a bit of information in this webinar, and as well as others that we've already done. But if you do feel like you have more questions and you'd like some technical assistance, we are offering that in a small group work session kind of setting, mostly virtual with a few in-person hybrid sessions. And so Andy Hill and Robin DeFalco are the ones to talk to about that, if you would like to sign up for some technical assistance.
Maybe just briefly, I'll state on the technical assistance that we are currently scheduling those work sessions, small group regional work sessions. In many cases, we're working with your regional economic development entities or COGs, and we're bringing together communities from your neighborhood. And so if you haven't heard yet, please stay tuned for details about those being scheduled, hopefully in September. Do feel free to reach out to Andy and I if you haven't heard, but there's a good chance you're already signed up on our list and we're already working on something that will hopefully address your needs and help you get your filings in if that's what you choose to do, maybe by the end of September. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Robin. So some additional resources. We've mentioned the Engage DOLA website previously. We will be posting all of these webinars on there, the slides as well as the recordings. There are also additional resources on there, including ways to gain knowledge on statutory concepts, finding resources to develop your baselines. There are recordings of stakeholder meetings, and there are frequently asked questions, which actually are very helpful if you're starting in on this process or in the middle of it, to visit those. Don't feel like you need to write all of these down. We will post them in the chat, but there are quite a few resources going forward for you. There's the DOLA Proposition 123 homepage, which we just highlighted. There's the CHAFO Edit funding programs page, and they do write this out, Colorado Affordable Housing Financing Fund.com. There's a Department of Homelessness Support Programs, the Department of Local Government Local Planning Capacity Grant Program, and then there's the 3 links for the reference table, the assistance tool, and the commitment filing site that we highlighted earlier today. Going forward, if you have questions, there are quite a few resources available to you as well. At the DOLA Division of Housing, there's Mo Mescal, the Deputy Division Director, and there's Connor Evison, the Analytics Manager, who is on this call today. At the DOLA Division of Local Government, there's Andy Hill, the Community Development Office Director, as well as Robin DeFalco, the Community Development Office Program Assistant, and they are both here today, I believe. And for CHAFA programs, there's Terry Barnard, who you heard from earlier, with the Multifamily Production and Outreach Manager. And for OEDIT programs, we have Hillary Cooper, who's the Director of Innovative Funding for Housing. We want to make sure that if you have questions or if you're looking to file and working through it, that there are a lot of resources available to you. And with that, we're going to pause for sort of some final questions before we wrap up today.
I don't see anything coming through the Q&A or the chat. So folks, if you do have questions, feel free to just raise your hand. We'll call on you. Or hopefully we've answered all of your questions.
Like every time I go to say thank you, we don't have any more, we get one coming in. So I was waiting just a minute. But this is sort of our wrap up slide, and we do appreciate you all being here. We hope we were able to answer a lot of your questions. And as we did mention, if you do have more, there are a lot of resources available to you that we've highlighted here. Just a few takeaways. What we heard from our 2 guests was really it does not take too long to file. And we've heard that from other people as well. And there is no penalty or clawback of not meeting your commitment. It allows you to keep your housing opportunities open if you choose to opt in, and you can partner on funding. So we hope that you see this as an opportunity and that you choose to participate, and that we're available with resources if you're moving forward and have additional questions. I don't see any more coming in. Melissa, if anyone else has any closing comments, otherwise, we're happy to hang out for a few minutes, but we have wrapped up what we have to say today.
Yeah, that's all we have. Nothing new in the Q&A or the chat, but as Sarah mentioned, a few of us will stay on to answer additional questions. If you do have anything you want to ask or you think about something, we'll stay on. So otherwise, thank you everybody for participating today, and thanks for all the really great questions. I think it highlights a lot of the interest and a lot of the just good community faith that we have throughout the state. So thank you all for your participation.